They beat Ronda Rousey's daughter into a coma, thinking she was just another girl. What her mother did next shocked everyone. Tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe for more. The first light of dawn filtered through the thick blinds of the small house in East Los Angeles, painting pale lines across the wooden floor where the shadows of early morning clung stubbornly. The house felt alive even before the city truly awoke, the distant hum of traffic on the highway like a pulse beneath the windows, constant, grounding. Ronda Rousey was already up, barefoot in her kitchen, hair tied in a tight knot that did not allow for compromise, her hands methodically wrapping the worn training bandages around her wrists, testing the stretch and memory of the fabric with quiet focus. The scent of black coffee merged with the faint smell of eucalyptus from the small diffuser by the sink, a reminder of the simplicity of the morning rituals that tethered her to her purpose. Upstairs, her daughter Leah lay curled under the thin sheets, the shape of her small frame outlined in the dim morning glow as she blinked awake, eyes adjusting to the hush that preceded school mornings. She stared for a moment at the ceiling, where the glow-in-the-dark stars she had placed with her mother years ago still clung, dull in the dawn, but reminders of the child she had once been, before her small world learned to weigh itself with whispers of fear and quiet glances that cut deeper than words. She reached for her sketchbook on the nightstand, fingers tracing the soft cover before pulling it to her chest, eyes closing for a breath, gathering something inside herself before the day demanded it from her again. Ronda moved quietly through the house, placing a bowl of oatmeal beside Leah's place at the table, the wooden surface polished by years of elbows and quiet breakfasts and the weight of silences too heavy to name. She did not speak, but the warmth of the room was filled with her presence, the quiet command of her movements, the way she leaned on the counter as she watched her daughter eat in small, hesitant spoonfuls. Leah's hair was tied back into a neat ponytail, strands of pale blonde escaping in wisps that curled against her cheek, the bruise from last week's practice still a fading shadow beneath her eye, a reminder of the work she was doing in the small dojo where Ronda taught her not just to fall, but to stand back up, to take up space, to claim herself in a world that liked to carve girls down to something manageable. Outside, the city was beginning its endless churn, the air already warming under a pale sun that rose behind the gray outlines of buildings and the skeletal arms of palm trees swaying like guardians over cracked sidewalks. Leah's backpack was heavy against her shoulders, the weight of her textbooks pulling at the thin straps as she moved down the steps, each step a small promise that she would face the day, even if she did not feel ready. The dojo bag, smaller and cleaner, was slung across her chest, the white belt folded neatly inside, her fingers brushing against it as she walked to the car, a small talisman of the mornings she spent sweating on the mat under the quiet but firm instruction of her mother. The drive to school was filled with the unspoken tension of mornings that wanted to be peaceful but were not. The radio played low, a talk show droning about traffic delays, but neither of them listened. Ronda's eyes moved between the road and her daughter's reflection in the window, the way Leah's gaze never quite stayed in one place, always drifting to the world outside. The graffiti-stained walls, the small stores with peeling paint, the children walking with their parents, some laughing, some silent. Each red light was a moment of suspended breath, a glance exchanged that said nothing but meant everything. Briarwood Academy stood like a fortress on the hill, its iron gates cold and unyielding even as the manicured lawns and ivy-wrapped columns tried to soften its edges. Children spilled from sleek black cars, laughter high and sharp in the air as they greeted each other with the easy familiarity that came from knowing they belonged. Leah stepped out, adjusting the strap of her backpack, her fingers touching the zipper of her hoodie as she pulled it lower over her face, eyes scanning the groups of students who gathered in clusters, their branded shoes scuffing at the concrete as they shifted and laughed, their voices dropping when they saw her. The hallways smelled of industrial cleaner and the faint, sweet scent of expensive perfume from the girls who passed by, their laughter trailing in the air like ghosts. Leah moved carefully, eyes lowered but aware, the edges of her vision catching the stares that flickered toward her and away again, the half-whispers of her name twisted into shapes she didn't recognize. Her locker was near the end of the hallway, the place where the light from the high windows fell in slanted lines across the floor, where shadows pooled near the feet of the boys who leaned against the lockers, their voices low, their eyes sharp and watching. They called her names, never loud enough for the teachers to hear, but always clear enough for her to understand. They mocked the way she walked, the way she wore her dojo hoodie, the way her hair curled after practice, sticking to her neck when she was sweaty and flushed. They called her Rousey's runt, fake fighter, and other words that made her skin burn with the heat of humiliation and fear she would not let them see. She clenched her fists in the sleeves of her hoodie, fingernails digging into her palms as she kept walking, ignoring the laughter that followed, the way they smirked at each other as if sharing a secret. Leah spent her lunches under the sycamore tree at the edge of the quad, the place where the ground was uneven, where the shade offered her a small reprieve from the constant eyes. Her sketchbook was open on her knees, her pencil moving in steady lines, drawing shapes she did not understand, patterns that filled the page until it felt like she was somewhere else, somewhere quiet. She did not look up often, but when she did, she saw them, the girls who sat together on the benches, glancing over with narrowed eyes, their heads leaning together as they whispered. Sometimes she caught them looking at her drawings, their eyes filled with something sharp, something cold. She tried to focus in class, but the whispers followed her, the quiet laughter when she raised her hand, the way Mr. Kessel, the history teacher, ignored her questions but smiled at the boys when they interrupted her. She took notes with trembling hands, her writing tight and precise, her eyes fixed on the pages as the words blurred, her throat tight with the effort of holding back the frustration that burned inside her like acid. She wanted to tell her mother, but every time she saw Rhonda's tired but proud eyes in the evenings, the words caught in her throat, shame twisting them into silence. At home, the evenings were quiet. Rhonda cooked dinner, the sound of the knife on the cutting board rhythmic and comforting, the smell of garlic and onions filling the small kitchen. They ate together, the television playing low in the background, the news anchors talking about things that felt far away. Leah pushed her food around her plate, her appetite gone, her mind replaying the laughter, the shoves in the hallway, the weight of the looks she could not shake off. She could feel her mother watching her, waiting for her to speak, but the words never came, and Rhonda, seeing the shadows under her daughter's eyes, said nothing, her own silence heavy with unspoken worry. At night, Leah lay in bed with her sketchbook against her chest, the moonlight painting thin lines across the floor, the shadows in the corners stretching like quiet watchers. She traced the lines of her latest drawing, a sketch of a girl standing alone, her reflection in the water beneath her showing a warrior with fists raised, strong and unafraid. Leah closed her eyes, pressing the sketchbook tighter, wishing she could be that reflection, wishing she could stand up and scream, push back, fight the way her mother had taught her. But the fear was a knot in her stomach, tightening every time she stepped into the school gates, Every time she heard the laughter, every time she felt the shove of a shoulder against hers in the hallway. Sleep came in fits. Dreams of running through endless hallways where the lockers banged shut behind her, where laughter echoed off the walls, where shadows reached for her with hands she could not escape. She woke with her heart pounding, the sound of her breathing loud in the quiet room, her fists clenched in the sheets, tears she did not want wetting her cheeks. She wiped them away quickly, sitting up, looking around the dark room, grounding herself in the silence, the steady sound of the clock ticking, the faint hum of the city outside. In the mornings, she would rise again, pulling on her hoodie, adjusting her backpack, checking the zipper of her dojo bag, taking a breath before stepping out into the light of day that felt too bright, too harsh against the fear that still clung to her like a second skin. She would see her mother waiting by the car, strong, unyielding, the quiet power in her posture a reminder of who she was, of what she could be. Leah would climb into the car, the silence between them filled with the promise that she would try again, that she would face another day, even as the fear twisted inside her, even as the whispers of shame tried to drown out the quiet voice that told her she was more than what they saw. The cracks beneath the facade grew wider with each passing day, each laugh, each shove, each silent glance. They spread through the walls of the school, through the quiet halls of their home, through the nights where sleep came in jagged breaths, where dreams turned into memories she could not share. The world around her did not see the slow erosion of a spirit fighting to remain whole, but inside, Leah felt it, the chipping away of courage, the weight of silence pressing down until it was hard to breathe. And somewhere, in the shadows of that quiet house, Ronda watched, waiting, knowing in the depth of her bones that the silence would not last forever, that there would come a day when the fight would leave the dojo and find them where they lived, demanding a reckoning that would test everything they believed they were. The morning that unfolded felt almost kind. The sky a soft shade of blue over Los Angeles, a breeze slipping through the open window as Leah sat on the edge of her bed with her dojo uniform folded neatly beside her. The fabric was still warm from the iron, creased in straight lines that gave her a small sense of order in a world that often felt like it tilted beneath her feet. She traced her finger over the white belt coiled on top, the simple knot at the end a reminder of countless mornings spent in the dojo under her mother's watchful gaze, learning to fall and stand again, to keep her eyes forward, to breathe even when fear threatened to swallow the air from her lungs. Downstairs, the house was awake but quiet, Ronda's steady presence in the kitchen filling the space like an anchor. She moved with precise efficiency, setting out a bowl of cut fruit and toast, her eyes flickering to the clock, to the door, to the small folded uniform in her daughter's hands as Leah entered the kitchen, holding it to her chest like a promise. The weight of what remained unspoken pressed against the edges of their morning routine, but neither allowed it to break the fragile calm that carried them through these hours before the world demanded they step outside and face it. Leah ate quietly, the taste of the toast like dust in her mouth, her stomach tight with the tension of anticipation she could not shake. Her mind was already at school, in the hallways that smelled of bleach and sweat, where the faces of those boys floated before her, their laughter like the echo of knives against glass. She finished her breakfast, washed her plate, and tucked her uniform carefully into her dojo bag before slinging her backpack over her shoulder, adjusting the straps so they would not dig into her skin. Ronda watched her from across the kitchen, her arms crossed, a softness in her eyes hidden beneath the firm line of her mouth, the same mouth that had spoken words of encouragement before each match, each competition, each moment when Leah had to find courage she didn't know she had. The drive to school was filled with the low hum of the city awakening, the streets busy with cars and cyclists weaving between lanes, the sidewalks lined with people clutching coffee cups, their faces bent over phones. Leah stared out the window, counting the trees as they passed, the lines on the road, the cracks in the pavement, grounding herself in the rhythm of the passing scenery. Her mother's hands gripped the steering wheel, the skin over her knuckles tight, the faint scars on her fingers catching the light as she turned into the school's long driveway, where cars waited in a slow crawl, dropping off students who moved in clusters toward the entrance. Briarwood Academy looked the same as it always did, a fortress of privilege and reputation with its manicured lawns and ivy-covered walls, the banners fluttering in the breeze announcing the upcoming inter-school competitions. Today, Leah knew there would be a demonstration of the martial arts club, a small exhibition where younger students would perform before the parents and teachers, a show of discipline and skill meant to impress. She was not scheduled to compete, but planned to help guide the younger girls, holding pads, adjusting stances, offering quiet encouragement with the soft authority she learned from watching her mother teach. The morning classes passed in a haze of half-heard instructions and the scrape of pencils against paper, the murmurs in the hallways as students shifted between rooms, the occasional sharp laugh that made Leah's shoulders tense. She kept her eyes on her notes, trying to absorb the lessons, but the constant awareness of the boys who tormented her was like a stone lodged in her chest, pressing with every breath. They lingered near the back of the classroom, trading whispers, their eyes cutting toward her when they thought she wasn't looking, smirks curling their lips when she shifted in her seat, trying to shrink into herself. At lunch, Leah found a corner of the courtyard to sit, away from the crowded tables where the popular kids laughed over their meals, sharing videos on their phones, the screens reflecting the bright midday sun. She opened her sketchbook, her pencil moving in slow, deliberate lines, drawing the shape of a figure standing tall, feet rooted to the ground, arms raised in quiet defiance. She wished she could be that figure, unshakable, unafraid, but the fear curled in her stomach, a reminder of every shove, every whispered insult, every time they called her names that made her ears burn and her eyes sting. As the lunch period ended, Leah helped the younger girls into their uniforms, tying belts with careful hands, offering smiles she did not feel, encouraging them as they looked up at her with wide, eager eyes. She adjusted their stances, corrected their grips, reminded them to breathe, to keep their eyes up, to remember the forms they had practiced. The girls laughed and joked, their excitement infectious for a moment, easing the tightness in Leah's chest as she watched them move with the unselfconscious joy of those who had not yet learned to fear the eyes of others. But the moment was fleeting. She saw them before she heard them, the boys gathering near the edge of the gym, their eyes fixed on her, their laughter low and cruel, their presence like a dark cloud spreading across the room. They watched her as she finished helping the last of the girls, their whispers drifting across the polished floor, each word a barb that lodged beneath her skin. She kept her eyes down, focused on folding the spare uniforms, her fingers trembling slightly as she tried to steady her breathing, to keep her hands from shaking. After the demonstration, as the students filtered out into the hallways, Leah stayed behind to clean up, gathering the pads and folding the mats with the practiced efficiency of someone used to tidying up after others had left. She did not see them approach, not at first, too focused on the neat lines of the mats, the way the foam pressed down beneath her hands, the quiet of the empty gym a fragile shield she did not want to break. But the hush was shattered by the scrape of shoes against the floor, the low, mocking laughter that made her freeze, her hands tightening on the edge of the mat. They surrounded her in the hallway outside the gym, their bodies forming a wall that blocked the exit, their faces twisted into sneers, eyes glinting with the satisfaction of the hunt. They taunted her, words sharp and cruel, questioning her worth, mocking her mother, calling her names meant to belittle and degrade, their voices rising in cruel harmony as they closed the space around her. Leah tried to step back to find an opening, but they moved with her, cutting off her escape, their laughter ringing in her ears as the fear clawed up her throat, making it hard to breathe. One of them grabbed her dojo bag, yanking it from her shoulder, spilling the carefully folded uniform onto the floor, the white fabric stark against the dirty tiles. Another kicked her sketchbook across the hallway, the pages fluttering open, her drawings exposed, torn by careless feet as they laughed and pointed, mocking the images that had been her sanctuary. She reached for the uniform, her fingers brushing the fabric, but a shove sent her sprawling, her hands scraping against the floor as she tried to catch herself, the sharp pain of torn skin a flash of reality in the chaos. They did not stop. A kick to her side made her cry out, her body curling instinctively to protect herself, her arms wrapping around her head as the blows came, each one driving the air from her lungs, each one a reminder of her smallness against their cruelty. She tried to remember her training, the lessons her mother had drilled into her, the movements that could have saved her, but fear froze her limbs, turned her thoughts into static as she lay on the cold floor, the laughter echoing around her like a nightmare she could not wake from. One of them pulled her up by her hair, her face contorted in pain as she was forced to her knees, the hallway spinning around her, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. She saw the phone in their hands, the red light of the recording, capturing her humiliation, her pain, her fear for their entertainment, for their quiet rooms where they would replay her suffering and laugh again. The final blow came, a fist to her face that snapped her head back, the world tilting, the ceiling lights blurring into streaks as darkness clawed at the edges of her vision. She fell, her body hitting the floor with a dull thud, the breath leaving her in a sharp gasp before the darkness swallowed her, merciful in its quiet, in its promise of oblivion. The laughter was the last thing she heard, fading as her consciousness slipped away, the cold floor pressing against her cheek, the scent of sweat and blood and fear thick in the air. When the teachers found her, the hallway was silent, the boys gone, the evidence of their cruelty scattered in torn pages and a discarded uniform, the bruises already blooming across her skin. Someone screamed, the sound high and panicked, a scuffle of feet as calls were made, the siren of the approaching ambulance cutting through the quiet, sharp, and insistent. They lifted her carefully, her head lolling, blood trickling from her nose, her arm bent at an angle that was wrong, painfully wrong. At the hospital, the bright lights and the smell of antiseptic were a harsh contrast to the darkness Leah had slipped into, her body unmoving on the stretcher as doctors and nurses moved around her, voices clipped and urgent, machines beeping in harsh rhythm as they worked to stabilize her. The words, possible concussion, internal bleeding, medically induced coma, were spoken in low, grave tones as they worked, as they moved her to a room where the machines would breathe for her, where the wires would monitor the fragile line between life and something else. Ronda arrived, her footsteps heavy, her eyes wide and unblinking as she took in the sight of her daughter, pale and broken beneath the harsh hospital lights, the tubes and wires a cruel mockery of the strength she knew was inside that small, battered body. She stood there, her fists clenched at her sides, the world narrowing to the steady beep of the heart monitor, to the rise and fall of her daughter's chest, to the rage that burned in her veins like wildfire, consuming the fear, consuming the helplessness, leaving only the cold, sharp promise that this would not go unanswered. She sat by the bed, her hand resting gently on Leah's, the warmth of her touch a promise, a vow that reached beyond the darkness, beyond the fear. She whispered words only Leah could hear, words filled with the weight of everything she had fought for, everything she would fight for again. And in that moment, as the machines beeped steadily, as the nurses moved quietly around them, Ronda knew that the silence had ended, that the world would soon learn what it meant to touch what was hers, that the fight was no longer contained within the walls of the octagon but had spilled into the world beyond, demanding her strength, demanding her fury, demanding her return. The hospital room was cold and quiet, the soft beeping of the monitors the only sign that time was moving at all. The morning sun that should have brought light to the world felt pale and empty through the narrow window, casting lines across the pale blanket covering Leah's still body. Ronda sat in the chair beside the bed, her elbows resting on her knees, her head lowered, her hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles turned white, the veins in her forearms visible, pulsing with the rhythm of the fury that moved through her blood like a living thing. Her daughter's hand lay in her own, so small and fragile under the thick bandages, the skin bruised and marked where IVs entered, her face pale, the faint movements of her chest beneath the blankets the only sign she was still there. Ronda did not cry, not now, not while there was something left to do, something that demanded every ounce of strength she had ever forged within herself through years of pain, of sweat, of blood left on the mats and inside the cages where she learned what it meant to take a hit and stand back up. This was different. This was not a fight that would end with a referee's whistle or the sound of a bell. This was a fight that reached deeper, to the very place inside her that had always known there would come a day when she would have to step outside the ring to protect what was hers, to protect the piece of her heart that now lay bruised and silent, the machines breathing for her because the world had taken what it had no right to touch. She stood, the movement precise and calm, and leaned down, pressing her lips to Leah's forehead, breathing in the scent of her hair, the faint shampoo smell that still clung despite the sterile scent of antiseptic. She straightened, her eyes clear, the decision settling into her bones with the weight of inevitability. She left the room without looking back, knowing there was nothing she could do here now, not in this place where silence reigned, where the machines did the work her daughter's body could not. She would do what she could, what she must, because the world had declared war, and Ronda Rousey had never learned to lose. The drive home was silent, the city moving around her like a blur of color and noise she did not hear. The hum of the engine, the only sound that reached her as she gripped the steering wheel, her mind sharp, clear, every memory of her daughter's laughter, her shy smiles, the way she walked with her shoulders slightly hunched to make herself smaller in a world that demanded she shrink, coming back with the force of a blade against stone. She pulled into the driveway, the car shutting off with a quiet click that seemed to echo in the stillness of the small house. Inside, the house was as they had left it that morning, the breakfast dishes washed and stacked. Leah's shoes near the door, her sketchbook resting on the edge of the couch where she had left it, the pages still open to a half-finished drawing of a girl standing with her fists raised, hair blowing back, eyes calm and unafraid. Ronda picked up the sketchbook, her thumb brushing over the lines, the careful shading, the small notations Leah had made in the margins in her precise handwriting. Notes about the position of the shoulders, the angle of the feet, the focus in the eyes. She placed the sketchbook back down, her jaw tightening as she turned away, moving through the house with purpose, the movements of a fighter preparing for battle. She walked into her room and opened the closet, pulling down the old cedar box from the top shelf, the weight of it solid and comforting in her arms as she carried it to the bed and set it down carefully. She opened it, the scent of leather and chalk rising, memories flooding back of early mornings and late nights in empty gyms, the sound of gloves hitting pads, the sweat that dripped down her back as she pushed herself past the point of exhaustion, learning how to survive, how to win. She lifted out her old fight gear, the gloves worn and soft from use, the wraps faded but still strong, the mouth guard in its small case, the old hoodie from her Olympic days with the patch on the sleeve that had once meant everything to her. Piece by piece she put it on, her movements calm and deliberate, the ritual of it grounding her, reminding her of who she was and what she had been forged to become. She wrapped her hands tightly, testing the tension of the fabric, flexing her fingers to ensure the blood still flowed, pulling the hoodie over her head and tying her hair back into a tight knot that would not come undone. She looked at herself in the mirror, the face that stared back at her the same as it had always been, but different now. Harder, sharper, the softness burned away by the fire that moved beneath her skin, demanding action, demanding retribution. She sat for a moment on the edge of her bed, her elbows on her knees, her head bowed, her eyes closed as she centered herself, breathing in through her nose, out through her mouth, the steady rhythm calming her, focusing her. She stood, grabbing her keys, the old duffel bag slung over her shoulder, the door closing behind her with a soft click that echoed in the quiet house, a promise that she would return, that she would not fail. The streets of Los Angeles were alive with the usual chaos of the afternoon, cars honking, people moving along the sidewalks, the noise a constant background to the thoughts that moved through her mind like a steel blade, cutting through the fear, leaving only clarity behind. She drove to the school first, the building looming in the afternoon light, the banners for the sports competitions still fluttering, the students moving in clumps across the lawns, unaware of the storm that was about to break over them. She parked and stepped out, the air cool against her skin, the weight of the duffel bag solid against her shoulder as she moved through the gates, her eyes scanning the crowds, searching, finding the faces she had memorized from the videos she had forced herself to watch in the sterile hospital room. Each frame burned into her mind, each laugh, each shove, each moment of her daughter's pain a mark on her soul she would never allow to fade. They were there, standing near the edge of the courtyard, laughing, their phones out, showing something to each other, their voices carrying in the cool air, carefree, confident, untouchable in the safety of their privilege and the silence of those who had allowed them to believe they could act without consequence. Their parents were there too, standing off to the side, talking among themselves, their expensive clothes and carefully practiced smiles the armor they wore to shield themselves from the world they had helped create, a world where boys could break a girl and walk away without a thought. Ronda moved toward them, her steps steady, her eyes fixed, the crowd parting around her as they felt the force of her presence, the quiet power that radiated from her with every step. She dropped the bag at her feet, rolling her shoulders back, her hands closing into fists, the wraps tight around her knuckles, the leather of her gloves creaking softly as she tightened her grip. The boys turned, their laughter faltering as they saw her, confusion and fear flickering across their faces as they realized who she was, as they realized that the world they had believed in was about to end. The first move was quick, a sharp jab that caught the leader of the group off guard, his head snapping back, his phone falling from his hand as he stumbled, the blood already dripping from his nose as he fell to the ground, clutching his face, the shock in his eyes mirrored in the faces of his friends as they backed away, their confidence crumbling in the face of the storm they had unleashed. Another tried to step forward, his hands raised, but Ronda moved like water, her body flowing into the movement, her elbow connecting with his ribs, the crack loud in the sudden silence, the air leaving his lungs in a gasp as he collapsed, clutching his side. A third tried to run, but she was faster, her hand closing around his wrist, twisting, pulling him off balance, her foot sweeping his legs out from under him, the ground meeting him with a thud that left him breathless, his eyes wide with panic as she stood over him, the promise of violence in her gaze enough to keep him frozen, trembling, the tears already forming as he realized there would be no escape. The parents shouted, moving forward, but stopped as she turned, her eyes like cold steel, the command in her posture halting them, their fear written across their carefully composed faces. Ronda stood there, the boys on the ground around her, their cries and groans a song she did not want but accepted, the crowd watching, recording, the truth of their actions and the consequences now tied together in the clear afternoon light. She picked up her bag, slinging it over her shoulder, her eyes sweeping over the crowd, meeting the gaze of the parents, the teachers, the students, letting them see the truth, letting them understand that there would be no silence, no forgetting, no hiding from what they had allowed to happen. She turned and walked away, the weight of the moment settling into her bones, the promise of what was to come shaping itself within her as she moved through the gates. The sound of sirens in the distance a reminder that the world would now have to face what it had created, that the silence had ended, that the reckoning had begun. She drove home, the roads a blur, the city moving around her as she returned to the place where her daughter lay, the promise of her fight now etched into the very fabric of who she was, a promise that would not be broken, that would not end until justice was done, until the world understood what it meant to touch what was hers. When she entered the house, it was quiet, the shadows long in the fading light, the air still holding the warmth of the day. She placed the bag down, the leather soft against the wood, and sat, her hands resting on her knees, her eyes closing as she breathed, the exhaustion settling in but unable to touch the core of her resolve. She stood, moving to the small table where Leah's sketchbook lay, picking it up, holding it against her chest, the promise of what was to come burning bright within her as she whispered words meant for the girl who could not yet hear them, words that were a vow, a declaration, a promise that the world would learn, that the world would change, that she would make it change. She would teach them all what it meant to stand, what it meant to fight, what it meant to protect, and in that moment, as the darkness settled around the small house, as the city lights flickered to life in the distance, Ronda Rousey knew that the battle had only just begun. The morning light slid across the living room floor of Ronda's small home, illuminating the scuffed wood and the quiet remnants of the previous night's storm that had settled across the city like a blanket. The silence that filled the house was different now, thick but alive, carrying the echoes of the day Ronda had walked onto the school grounds and broken the illusion of untouchable power that those boys had clung to, an illusion shattered in the clear afternoon air as they had fallen one by one, beneath the precise, uncompromising movements of a mother who had learned long ago how to fight for what she loved. The world outside moved on, but within these walls something had shifted, a breath of resolve and promise that touched every corner of the small, neat rooms. The sketchbook still lay on the table where she had left it, Leah's careful lines whispering stories of quiet courage, the pages smoothed by Rhonda's hands as she turned them slowly, studying the images that had once been her daughter's refuge when words had failed her. Each drawing felt like a piece of Leah's spirit, pressed into paper with the determined gentleness that had always lived beneath her shy smiles and downturned eyes. Rhonda closed the book carefully and placed it back on the table, the promise she had made to her daughter in the quiet of the hospital room pulsing within her like a second heartbeat, reminding her that the fight was not over, that there was more to be done, that justice was more than punishment. It was the promise of safety, of a future where girls like Leah would no longer have to hide the power they carried within themselves. She stepped into her bedroom and pulled on her training clothes, the familiar feel of the fabric a comfort against her skin, the stretch and give reminding her of countless hours spent pushing past pain and exhaustion, finding the edge of herself and stepping beyond it. She laced her shoes with steady hands, the memory of wrapping Leah's small hands in training tape before their early morning sessions bringing a warmth to her chest even as the steel of her resolve settled deeper into her bones. She looked at herself in the mirror, the reflection that stared back at her calm, unflinching, the lines around her eyes a testament to years of battles fought and won, each scar a memory, a story of survival, a lesson that she was now ready to pass on. The school had not expected her return, not like this, not with a proposal they could not refuse. The video of the confrontation in the courtyard had spread quickly, forcing the administration to reckon with the truth of what they had ignored for too long, the cries of the students who had been silenced, the quiet suffering that had lived beneath the polished surface of their hallways now exposed for all to see. Parents had begun to call, some with anger, others with gratitude, their voices joining in a chorus that demanded change, demanded accountability, demanded that the school take action to protect their children, to teach them that they were not powerless, that they did not have to remain silent. And so, when Rhonda walked through the front doors of Briarwood Academy that morning, the halls fell silent, the eyes that followed her carrying a mixture of fear and hope, the students pressing themselves against the lockers to let her pass, their whispers soft, reverent, as they watched the woman who had done what no one else would. She carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had nothing left to prove, her eyes scanning the faces around her, seeing the fear in the eyes of those who had once laughed at her daughter, seeing the hope in the eyes of the girls who had watched from the shadows, waiting for someone to show them that they could stand, that they could fight back. The gymnasium was cool and echoing, the polished floor reflecting the overhead lights as Rhonda stepped inside, the duffel bag slung over her shoulder heavy with training pads and gloves, the tools of the trade she had mastered, the tools she would now pass on. A group of girls stood clustered near the edge of the mats that had been laid out, their eyes wide, some shifting nervously, others clutching water bottles, their whispers filling the space with a soft hum of uncertainty. Some of them were younger, their hair pulled back into tight ponytails, their faces open, eager, while others were older, their eyes carrying the weight of things they could not yet speak, the fear that had settled into their bones evident in the way they held themselves, shoulders hunched, arms crossed over their chests as if to make themselves smaller. Rhonda dropped her bag and looked at them, her gaze steady, the silence stretching out before she moved, unzipping the bag and pulling out the pads, the gloves, laying them out in neat lines on the mats. The girls watched, their eyes following her movements, some exchanging glances, others taking hesitant steps forward, drawn by the quiet promise that lived in the way she moved, in the way she did not demand but invited, in the way she carried her strength not as a weapon but as a shield, offering it to them, letting them see that it was possible, that it was theirs to claim if they chose. She began simply, showing them how to stand, how to plant their feet, how to find their balance, how to breathe. The girls mirrored her movements, some awkward, some graceful, the sound of their feet shifting on the mats, a quiet rhythm that filled the room, the soft thud of their hands against the pads as she moved down the line, correcting their stances with gentle touches, adjusting elbows, lifting chins, showing them how to keep their eyes up, to meet the gaze of the world without fear. They were hesitant at first, their punches soft, uncertain, the weight of their fear holding them back, but Ronda spoke to them with her movements, with the calm certainty in her posture, with the way she smiled when they got it right, the way she nodded when they tried again, the way she stayed patient, waiting for them to find the courage to let themselves believe. Slowly, the energy in the room began to shift, the hesitance melting into laughter as the girls began to find the rhythm, their punches landing with more confidence, their eyes lighting up as they discovered the strength in their own bodies, the power that lived beneath the fear. They began to encourage each other, voices rising in small cheers when someone landed a clean hit on the pads, when someone managed to hold their ground without flinching, when someone who had started with shaken hands found herself standing firm, her feet rooted, her eyes bright with the realization that she could do this, that she could protect herself. Ronda moved among them, her presence a calm, steady guide, demonstrating techniques, showing them how to break free from holds, how to fall without injury, how to use their bodies to protect themselves without needing to overpower, teaching them that strength was not just in muscle, but in knowing, in believing, in refusing to surrender their power to fear. She saw the moments it clicked for them, the way their shoulders straightened, the way their laughter grew freer, the way they began to look each other in the eyes, to see themselves in one another, to understand that they were not alone, that they could stand together, that they could protect each other. The parents who watched from the edges of the gym saw it too, the tears in their eyes quiet as they saw their daughters laughing, moving with confidence. The weight of fear lifted for a moment as they punched the pads with small, determined fists as they learned to use their voices, to shout, to claim their space, to declare that they would not be silenced. Some of the mothers stepped forward, asking if they could try, and Ronda welcomed them, showing them the same movements, guiding them with the same patience, watching as the room filled with the sound of women and girls learning to stand, to fight, to believe in themselves. The training sessions became a routine, each day bringing more girls, more mothers, more quiet faces that carried the hope of change, the promise of a future where strength was not something to be feared, but something to be shared, to be celebrated. The school, once resistant, began to see the difference. The teachers noticing the way the girls walked taller in the hallways, the way they looked people in the eyes, the way they stood up for each other, refusing to allow the old patterns of silence and fear to continue. Ronda's own life became intertwined with theirs, the stories they shared with her after class, the quiet confessions of moments when they had felt powerless, when they had been hurt, when they had stayed silent out of fear. She listened, each story fueling the fire within her, each story a reminder of why she fought, of why she would continue to fight, of why this was her purpose now, not just for Leah, but for every girl who had ever felt alone, who had ever been told to be small, to be quiet, to be afraid. And in the quiet moments at home, when she returned to the small house, the scent of sweat and chalk still on her skin, she would sit beside Leah's bed in the hospital, her daughter's hand resting in hers, the machines still beeping softly, the steady rise and fall of her chest a promise that she would return, that she would wake, that she would see what her mother had built, what they had created together. Ronda would tell her stories of the girls, of their laughter, of their strength, her voice soft, steady, letting her daughter know that the world was changing, that the world was learning, that the lessons Leah had taught her through her quiet courage were now being shared, spreading, growing. The lesson of strength was no longer just about fists and elbows, about strikes and throws. It was about standing up, about refusing to be silent, about lifting each other when the world tried to push them down, about claiming their power and using it to protect, to heal, to teach. And as Ronda sat in the quiet of the hospital room, the light of the city outside flickering as the night settled in, she knew that they were ready, that they were stronger together, that the world would no longer be allowed to take from them without consequence. The fight was far from over, but now it was no longer just hers to fight. It belonged to all of them, to every girl who stepped onto the mats and found her strength, to every mother who learned to hold her ground, to every person who chose to stand with them. And in that quiet, with her daughter's hand in hers, Ronda knew that the lesson of strength was being learned, one breath, one punch, one brave step at a time. The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and quiet, the kind of quiet that seeped into the bones, reminding every person who walked its length that time here moved differently, measured not by clocks, but by the rhythm of breath and the hum of machines. Ronda sat beside Leah's bed, her hands resting gently on her daughter's, feeling the soft warmth of her skin against her calloused palms, the slow, steady rise and fall of her chest beneath the thin hospital blanket, the only sign of the fight her daughter waged within herself. Outside the window, the lights of Los Angeles blinked and shimmered in the early dawn, the sky soft with the promise of morning, the world on the cusp of waking while inside. The world felt suspended, caught between the hope of recovery and the fear of what might come. Days had passed since Ronda began the self-defense classes at Briarwood Academy, days filled with the sound of girls learning to strike pads with hands that had once been too afraid to lift in defense, the laughter that rose as they found their strength, the soft cries of triumph when a movement clicked, when they felt the power in their own bodies and realized that they were not powerless. Parents had begun to speak of the changes they saw, mothers standing a little taller, fathers finding tears in their eyes as they watched their daughters move with newfound confidence, teachers pausing as they noticed the shifts in the hallways, the small groups of girls who now stood together, unafraid, no longer easy targets for the whispers and shoves that had once defined their days. For Ronda, each session was a reminder of why she fought, of why she had stepped into the ring so many years ago, not just for the medals or the titles, but for the lessons it had taught her, the discipline, the resilience, the belief that no matter how many times the world tried to knock her down, she could stand again. She saw it now in the eyes of the girls who came to the gym, the way they looked at her, the way they began to look at themselves in the mirror, seeing not weakness but the spark of possibility, the promise of who they could become. And every evening, after the last girl had left, after the mats had been wiped down and the pads stacked neatly in the corner, Ronda would return to the hospital, her body tired but her spirit alive, the stories of the day ready on her tongue as she sat beside Leah, sharing the victories of the girls, the small moments of courage, the laughter, the hope. She believed, in the quiet of that sterile room, that Leah could hear her, that somewhere in the place where her daughter's mind was resting, she felt the warmth of those stories, the promise that the world was changing, that the fight Leah had begun was continuing in ways neither of them could have imagined. It was on one of these evenings, as the sky turned from dusk to dark, the lights outside flickering like small beacons against the black, that Leah's hand moved, a small twitch, so slight that for a moment Ronda thought she had imagined it. She held her breath, her eyes fixed on Leah's face, watching, waiting, the world narrowing to the space between them. And then it happened again, a small, deliberate movement, followed by the slow flutter of eyelids, the long lashes lifting as Leah's eyes opened, unfocused at first, blinking against the harsh light of the room. Ronda's breath caught in her chest, a sob breaking free before she could stop it, her hand tightening around Leah's as she leaned closer, her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. Leah's eyes moved, slowly, searching, settling on her mother's face, a small frown of confusion pulling at her brow before her lips parted, the faintest sound escaping, a whisper of a word that carried all the weight of the world within it. Mom. Tears slipped down Ronda's cheeks, hot and unstoppable, as she pressed her forehead against Leah's, her laughter mixing with the sobs that shook her shoulders, the relief so profound it felt like a physical force, lifting the weight that had pressed against her for so long. She pulled back just enough to see Leah's eyes, the clarity returning, the confusion fading, replaced by recognition, by the small, tired smile that broke across her daughter's face, a smile that was stronger than any fight, any victory Ronda had ever experienced. In the days that followed, Leah's recovery was slow but steady. Each movement, each word, each smile a triumph, a testament to the strength that lived within her, the same strength Ronda had seen in the girls at the gym, the same strength she had spent her life trying to embody. The nurses began to smile when they entered the room, the doctors' voices taking on a note of cautious optimism as they discussed progress. The slow weaning from machines, the gentle steps toward sitting up, toward standing, toward walking again. Ronda stayed with her through it all, guiding, supporting, encouraging, her hands steady as she helped Leah to sit up, to swing her legs over the edge of the bed, to take those first hesitant steps down the hallway, the IV pole trailing beside them, the beeping of the monitors a constant companion as they moved, as Leah's legs trembled but held, as her eyes, bright with determination, lifted to meet her mother's, the silent promise passing between them that this was only the beginning. When the day came that Leah was able to leave the hospital, the sky was clear, the sun warm on their faces as they stepped outside, the air filled with the scent of the city, the sound of traffic, the distant calls of birds overhead. Leah held Ronda's hand tightly, her steps careful but confident, her eyes taken in the world that had continued outside the hospital walls, a world that felt both familiar and new, a world she was ready to face again, not as the girl who had once been afraid, but as the young woman who had survived, who had fought, who had returned. The return home was quiet, the small house filled with the soft sounds of their movements as they settled back into the spaces they had left, the rooms now holding a new energy, a sense of renewal, of purpose. Leah moved slowly through the house, her hand brushing over the back of the couch, the edge of the kitchen table, the doorway where her growth had been marked in pencil lines, each inch a memory, a reminder of the passage of time, of the girl she had been, of the woman she was becoming. Ronda watched her, the pride and love in her eyes unhidden, her heart full as she saw Leah move with a quiet strength, the same strength she had seen in the girls at the gym, in the mothers who had joined them, in the community that had begun to grow around the lessons of self-defense, of confidence, of reclaiming their power. Leah was a part of that now, a living symbol of what it meant to stand back up, to face the world even when it had tried to break you, to find the courage to keep going. It was Leah who asked to visit the gym first, her voice quiet but firm as she stood in the kitchen one morning, the sunlight catching in her hair, her eyes steady as they met Rhonda's, the unspoken request clear. Rhonda nodded, a small smile breaking across her face, her heart swelling with the knowledge that this was the next step, that this was what they had been building toward, that the lessons of strength they had shared were now ready to be lived. The gym was alive with the sound of laughter and the sharp smack of gloves against pads when they arrived. The girls turning to see them, their eyes lighting up, their voices rising in greetings, in cheers, in the quiet, respectful nods that carried the weight of what they had learned together. Leah moved among them, her steps careful but sure, the girls parting to let her through, some reaching out to touch her hand, to offer shy smiles, to thank her without words for the lessons she had inspired, for the fight she had fought, for the strength she had shown them was possible. Rhonda watched as Leah stepped onto the mats, the girls gathering around her, the energy in the room shifting as they prepared to train, to learn, to grow. She saw her daughter smile, saw her laugh, saw her correct a stance, lift a chin, adjust an elbow with the same careful guidance Rhonda herself had given, the legacy of strength passing from mother to daughter, from fighter to survivor, from one generation to the next. And as the sun set outside, the warm light filtering through the high windows of the gym, casting long shadows across the mats where the girls moved and learned and laughed, Rhonda knew that this was the true victory, the true purpose of every fight she had ever fought, every battle she had ever won or lost. It was not about the titles or the medals, not about the fame or the recognition. It was about this moment, about the quiet strength that lived in each of these girls, in each of these women, in her daughter, in herself. It was about the promise that no matter how hard the world tried to break them, they would rise, they would fight, they would protect each other, they would teach each other. They would never again be silent. The battle was not over, and it might never truly end, but it had changed. It had grown. It had become something bigger than any one person, something that would continue long after the lights of the gym were turned off for the night, long after the last punch had been thrown, the last stance corrected. And in that knowledge, Rhonda found peace, found purpose, found the strength to continue, to guide, to teach, to protect, to love, knowing that as long as they stood together, as long as they fought together, as long as they believed in the power that lived within them, they would never be defeated. The victory was not in the end of the battle, but in the courage to continue, in the courage to stand, in the courage to believe that the world could be changed, one breath, one step, one brave, unyielding moment at a time. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe for more. Share this video with someone who needs to see it, and check out our other stories next.